The Chumash, Katanamuk, Kawaisu, Tataviam, Yokut, and Yaulumne peoples lived side by side in these mountains before the European invasion. It is their land we now live on, and their concept, Liukshup, community in balance, that wraps our festival in the warmth of its vision. Our first performer tonight is Dee Dominguez, descendant of Katanamuk and Yaulumne Yokuts peoples, whose land stretched from the Kern River to Cuddy Valley. There are many wonderful things I could say about Dee, but because we are short on time this evening, I will direct you for these to the bio in the program, as we will do for all performers. As she has done many times before under the umbrella of the Southern California Indian Storytellers Association, Dee will entertain us tonight with traditional and modern stories from her Ventureño, Chumash, Katanamuk, and Yaulumne Yokuts cultures. Please welcome Dee Dominguez.
To tell you some stories that are contemporary, some are traditional, some are about my family. They're all about this land. We're going to go back in time a little bit. Not too long ago, just a little bit, when at one time there were only animals on this land. There were squirrels, deer, like the kind I saw on the freeway. I was coming up the Grapevine. Condors, hawks, eagles, dolphins, whales, catfish, and all of these animals took care of the earth. They took care of the air to make sure it was clean, because everyone needs to breathe. They took care of the water because they all needed water to drink. They took care of the soil because from the soil grew all of the plants that they all needed to eat. And they always took care of each other and made sure that all of the animals had good food to eat, water to drink, and a good place to live. And they had meetings like this to make sure that everything was in order. And one day someone came up to the podium and said, "I think we should make people." Oh, the audience said, "People? What's that? Who's going to take care of them? Where are they going to live? What kind of food are they going to eat?" And as time went on, they had more and more meetings trying to decide what to do. Condor came up to the podium with his great wings and said, "They should be like me because I can travel more than 100 miles a day looking for food." Caterpillar came up and said, "They should be like me because there are lots of good green leaves to eat." Butterfly with her beautiful wings said, "They should be like me." Dolphin came and said, "The ocean is wide and big," and so did whale. Coyote came up and said, "They should be like me and have big paws because I can run fast and dig holes." And Lizard says, "No, no, 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 they should be like me and have 5 fingers so they can pick things up." And Coyote said, "No, they should have big paws like me." And Lizard says, "No, they should have 5 fingers." And they argued, and the moderator came over and says, "Coyote, Lizard, come here. We cannot have all this fighting. We will settle this evening so we can carry on." He said, "Lizard, you stand right here. We're going to have this line right here, Lizard right here, Coyote over here. And you see those great big rocks over there?" He says, "On the count of 3, whoever reaches that rock and puts his paw or his hand on that rock, that is what the people will have. Now stand behind the line. On the count of 3, Coyote, get back. Behind the line. 1, Coyote. 2. Coyote said, that little guy. 3, and they ran, and the little lizard scuttered and ran this way, and Coyote with leaps and bounds. And we all know who won that race. So whenever you see little lizard, you tell him thank you. Because we would have had great big paws, and we would have run fast and dug great big holes. Part of that, after all these meetings, was that then the responsibility of taking care of the earth and the air and the water then was given to the people, including taking care of the animals. The people would now take care of them. Coyote was very angry. And he walked up to that podium and he said, fine, the people will have 5 fingers. But then the people would also have death. So that is how death came to the people. Time forward. In the 1850s, cattle was being brought up to our area. And some of the farmers, the ranchers, began to see these great big birds up in the sky. And they would go in circles way up high and catch the wind drifts. And when they saw them on the ground, they said, oh my God, that big bird, he'll take a whole cow. We can't have that. Oh my God, there's 15, 20 of them up there. That means I will lose 20 head of cattle. And so there was posses that were formed to shoot the condors because the ranchers did not want to lose their cattle. Is there anyone out here who's 5 feet tall? I need a volunteer. 5 feet? Come on up. Okay, 5'4". Coming up. Okay. Hands out. Okay, we'll lose 4 inches right here. Okay. Now go up. This is 10 feet. A condor has a wingspan up to 10 feet. So this will be our condor specialist for today. Thank you. So you can see how these ranchers were afraid. These great big birds, the largest bird on land. About 1986, there were only about 16 condors in our area left in the state, where there had been so many. And a few very far-thinking biologists got together and said, we have to do something. Because when these 16 are gone, there will be no more condors. And so they got together with the Los Angeles Zoo, and they captured the last 16 and began a breeding program. Well, the breeding program was very successful, and pretty soon there were many teenage condors in the zoo. And the biologists got together again and said, oh my gosh, what do we got to do something about all these birds? There's not enough room. And someone said, well, I guess we're going to have to let them go. And the biologist says, well, I don't know. They were born in the zoo. They don't know. They didn't have any nurturing from adult condors out in the wild. They don't know where to get food. They don't know where to live. They don't know what to stay away from. And they said, well, we're going to have a lot of hope and do a lot of praying. So they created these condor release stations up at Hopper Mountain, Bitter Creek, Big Sur. But before they let the condors go, at these release sites, they built these very tall aviaries, bigger than this area here, this gazebo. And there the condors would stay for about 10 to 14 days, so they could acclimate themselves to the outdoors and not being in the Los Angeles Zoo. And then they would let them go. Well, it was doing pretty good until I think it was at PMC that some people would leave their windows open and their sliding doors open and when they went to town. And these teenage condors said, wow, what's over there? And they went in those houses and they pulled the drapes down and they took the bedspread and they got in the refrigerator and the people came home and they said, this isn't going to work. So the biologists got together again and said, what are we going to do? we've got to do something. Our program's in trouble. They said, well, how about if we release one of the original condors that was born in the wild, and they can mentor these little teenagers. They said, well, who are we going to let go? They're all breeding. They said, well, there's one, AC8, adult condor number 8, who was from Tejon Ranch and who was no longer breeding. They said, we can let her go, and she can teach these little condors where they can go, where they can't go, and they won't be in trouble anymore. So they took adult condor number 8 up to the release station, and she stayed there for about 2 weeks. But the day that they brought her out there, and I didn't tell you, was that when she was captured, she had a mate. But they were separated, and he was let go, and she was still at the zoo. And condors, when they choose a mate, they stay with that one till they die. But unusual was that when adult condor number 8 was brought to the release site, her old mate came and landed on top of the cage. And he stayed there all that day, then that night, until the next day. And so you have to wonder, how did he know that she was there? And so, that is a condor love story. And since he had been released previously, he had another mate, and so he left. And so then, after the 2 weeks, adult condor number 8 was released into the wild. And I'm sure many of you know that she was shot by a poacher on Tejon Ranch. My daughter is a biologist of endangered species. And when she graduated from college, she moved to Arizona to work for the Peregrine Fund and worked with condors. Well, one day in 2007, I got up and I said, I'm going to go visit my daughter. And I packed up my car. So it was an 8-hour drive. When I arrived there, it was about 7 or 8 at night. And I went into the compound and opened the door. And there's 5 or 6 biologists very seriously looking at the news, internet, on the phone. And I said, daughter, what's wrong? She says, Mom, you came from California. It's burning. I said, what do you mean? She says, well, there's a fire down by San Diego, and the condor site there has been evacuated. The birds were taken away, and one building actually burned down. There's another fire up in San Gabriel Mountains, and there's another one on Hopper Mountain heading towards Fraser Park. And she says, and we're very concerned about Hopper Mountain fire because there's 2 condor chicks up in the mountains. And this fire is so hot and so big that we cannot have someone propelled from a helicopter down to the nest to rescue the little chick, and neither can we have a biologist hike up to rescue any of the chicks. So the biologists were driving up 99, 5, and 101. Well, afterwards, we learned that both chicks survived, and that the adult condors had flown northwest to the Big Sur area. But each day, a mother or father condor would fly through the smoke and the fire to feed the little chick, spend some time, fly out, and then either the mother or father would then come back. Because condors, male and female, both take turns of caring for their chick. One stays with them at the nest while the other one is looking for food. That one brings the food back, and then they alternate. So the Indian people say that we always look to the animals to know how to live. And this is a family story, because we as people too often put ourselves in danger for our children to save them. The Chumash people say that condor used to be all white. Until one day, condor was way up in the sky, going round and round, further and further up, very, very high. And he looked down, and he saw something very shiny way down at the earth. And he said to himself, "What is that?" Because condors are very curious. And he began to go down, down, down. And then it got very dark, and it was hot. And he closed his wings and still going towards that shiny gold thing until it hurt him. And he lost his feathers. He took a dive and came back up. What that was a fire. And that darkness was smoke. And yes, he was white, but as he came through that smoke, he turned black. And when he did his wings like this, the white remained underneath. And he got so close to the fire that it burned the feathers off his neck. And that's why he's red and doesn't have any feathers on his head. That's what the Chumash people say. Excuse me. My grandfather, Joe Chalola, was born on Paso Creek about 1830. He was a very well-known storyteller and a traveler. He liked to fish at a waterfall at the entrance to Kern Canyon. You can't see that waterfall today because in the early 1900s, the Army Corps of Engineers dynamited the springs to take away that waterfall so we could have a road into the canyon. But if you were to go on the road to the canyon, and just before you go in the canyon, there's a place where you can pull off to the left. Park your car there and walk along the edge and look over the fence, and you can see the bed of the waterfall. My grandfather, Joe Chalola, would take a tule boat after he did some fishing there, and he would go down the river from the canyon mouth down to the little village by Rancheria Road, down to Bakersfield. He would use a stick to guide his tule boat down the river. He avoid the big rocks, not too close to the sandbar. Go down to Bakersfield, Woilu. He went down to Buena Vista Lake. He went down to Bitter Creek. He went up San Emilio Creek. And then he would go back to Buena Vista Lake and park on the sand area where all the other tule boats were. Then he would get back in the tule boat and go north to Tulare Lake and visit his friends and go all the way up until he got to the Chowchilla River and visited his friends for a while before he got back into his tule boat and guided it back down to the Kern Canyon. And then he would go back to Paso Creek. On the Tijon Ranch Reservation, there's 5 kinds of acorn. The best kind was in Cummings Valley. And we would climb over that big mountain into Cummings Valley. That was the best acorn. The next acorn was very good. And it was up in Tejon Creek, Paso Creek, and those areas. The third one, if you didn't have the best, and the other one, it was pretty good. It would be okay. When you got to the fourth one, it was really like acorn. And the fifth one, nobody ate that one. It was too bitter. And where were the best pine nuts? Why, behind Cuddy's ranch house. And the people would pack up their horses, and the women and the children that were able to carry loads, they would pack up the biggest baskets and the biggest containers and take the horses, come over the mountains from Tejon Creek, spend the night at Castaic Lake, and come over to Cuddy's Ranch. There, then they would spend the day loading up their baskets and containers before they headed back and spent the night in Castaic Creek. The next day early, they would go up the mountains and spend another night there. And then the next morning, they would go back to Tejon Creek. The Chumash people call the owl Muhu. How many people have seen an owl? Do they look like other birds? No, they're very different. But the Chumash people say they used to look like the other birds. Until one day, Muhu was out flying around, and he landed down by this little creek in a little tree, and he began to sing. And he sang, and all of the animals stopped to listen to him. The squirrels and the other birds, the eagles, the condors, the crickets. And they said, listen to Muhu, he sings so beautifully. And he sang, and all of a sudden out of that creek came out this great big green slimy monster and frightened Muhu away. He went home that day and he says, oh my God, who was that? Who was that thing? Next time I go there, I will not be afraid. And I will find out who that is. Another day he was out flying around and he landed on that little tree down by the creek. And he began to sing again. And he sang, and all of the animals listened to him. They said, listen to Muhu, he sings so beautifully. And then all of a sudden out of that creek came out that great big green slimy monster. And before Muhu could say something, the monster said to him, oh, Muhu, you sing so beautifully. Can I give you a hug? And before he could say something, he squeezed him too tight. Up popped his ears. He squeezed him again, and his beak got smashed, and his eyes bugged out. Muhu flew home that day. Poor Muhu. And now when you see Muhu flying in the trees at night, he sings, who did this to me? Who? And that is what the Chumash people say. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.